Well, good afternoon, folks. I'm Eli Loftus. I'm the Wildfire Community Resiliency Lead Planner for the Okanagan Conservation District. Thank you all for joining us here for the last session today of the agroforestry track. We're going to be talking about home and vision zone assessments, or as I've subtitled it again, keep it simple, try not to freak them out. Out of curiosity, before we go in, how many folks here have done a home and vision zone assessment, fire-wise assessment, or something is similar to? Well, good. So this will be some old information for some of you, and then maybe some new information that's new methodology. At least for Rosalie here. It's just part of your standard orientation, so it all works out for you. So in most cases, we're talking about keeping homes from burning from the outside in and the inside out. Home ignition zone assessments are probably, from a fire perspective, the best single means of outreach and education that we have out there for individual property owners. At least in the way that we conduct them at Okanagan CD, it was more or less, you were able to give a property owner about an hour, maybe even 2 hours of your time to discuss the resiliency challenges and sometimes the recovery challenges for their specific property. So it gets into a lot of different nuance, a lot of context, but also gives a face to many of the fire resiliency principles, but also many other conservation concerns that conservation districts deal with here in Washington and beyond. You know, it's a pretty diverse activity. Some days, like Okanagan County, we go out to, Microsoft senior vice president's mansions in the woods. Some days we go out to Tim Shack's out in the sagebrush. It's a pretty diverse thing. Its greatest value, at least for now, while we work to address the challenges of actually providing financial assistance, it's probably our best means of being able to utilize technical assistance to provoke direct action by landowners, property owners, renters, when it comes to increasing the resiliency of their homes. It's been well established here that treating vegetative fuel is an effective means of reducing wildfire risk. But if we are not beginning to encourage property owners to retrofit their homes to make those structures into themselves resistant to wildfire, much of that fuels work that occurs outside or exterior to the home has moderated or muddled value going forward. So for some of us, we're going to be probably pretty familiar with a graphic like this. This is just 22 of the most obvious places where ember showers can ignite a wildfire. As many of you probably know, it's not flames themselves that burn houses down. It's not, the popular imagination, and a wall of flames just hurtling down towards any of them, forgetting a structure or barn or whatever it is, it's embers. And so here we're just seeing a multitude of different places on it's admittedly idolized home in the woods, where you could see some sort of ignition caused by exposure to embers. We've got everything from skylights and chimneys to wood piles, flower pots, trash cans, to several of which I'm not quite sure what they're pointing at. Apparently 22 is garage door. That's great. So when it comes to doing home risk assessments, I approach it the way that I put it as is that you get to be that person's in the moment, their personal Steve Irwin for wildfire. My initial strategy of bursting out of the car and tackling them to the ground and saying, "Wow, what a beauty this is," did not quite work for many of the original folks, but moderated and adjusted a little bit. It's something where you want to have whatever energy fits yourself, It's a very personal interaction, but also very technical. But both be yourself, but also be whomever you need to be in that moment, give that person that reassurance, that inspiration, that genuine value of the interaction. Many folks don't know what to expect, or at least for our home ignition zone assessments in Okanagan County, it is self-selected. People involved sign up for them either through our website or through the Department of Natural Resources Wildfire Neighbors page. And many of them really have no clue what's going to happen. Or they, there are some folks who we can tell, when you roll up, you can tell that they've been cleaning around the house, even though we're going to be looking on the inside of their house for several hours before our arrival. And we have some people who have done absolutely jack all, repair their properties in 100%, and so you get a lot of things. The main point of it is just simply is to be honest, be direct, and be kind. It's just like anything else, people don't like to learn. It's presented to them in a negative, dictatorial, just domineering kind of context. We never use the phrase, you must do this. We don't try to make people feel like they've done wrong. Very often, in some cases, they have done wrong when it comes to decisions that they've made about their homes or their current level of maintenance. But the goal is not to browbeat people, it's not to frighten or scare them. It is to inspire them and to motivate them to move forward with this action. One thing that you have to make clear is that simply put is that not all wildfire resiliency actions are created equal. Well, when we're done with the visual side of the presentation, we'll hop on out and have a look at some of these buildings around us here today. For those of you who are familiar with the HIZs, a lot of these buildings out here actually have some pretty glaring flaws when it comes to their fire resilience. But the worst thing that you can do, the worst outcome of an interaction is that you can have in this kind of stuff is that a property owner thinks that they need to more or less hop into a car, drive to the nearest Lowe's or Home Depot, buy a bunch of crap, and start hacking away or sawing away at the property, or they start loading stuff into the back of the truck to take it done. I've literally watched, sometimes, you know, it depends on the homeowner, maybe it depends on the job I've done. I've literally, as I've been driving away from an assessment, watched homeowners wander out of the garage and grab a chainsaw and get ready to go. While I appreciate the energy, that's not quite what the goal is there. The goal is to get them to observe the possibly long list, but easily manageable list of resiliency actions that will propel them forward as they go along that wildfire resiliency journey. Also, simply put, we never certify that a home is fire safe or fire wise or fire resistant. We just always talk about increasing resiliency and resistance. That saves us from any legal challenges possibly, and then also is just generally accurate. No home is 100%, or no structure, I should say, if you assess everything from chicken coop to barns. No structure is ever going to be 100% resilient to wildfire, no matter what you do, unless you build that home underground out of cement with no windows. And the most essential thing is that we do occasionally, when we have a large volume, we do assessments for property owners that are not present. It is vastly preferable to have property owner present when you're doing one of these risk assessments, so we get to get that one-on-one interaction, and we get so much more individual and personal contact with property. The biggest complaints, the only time I've ever gotten angry emails from folks is when I've done a risk assessment for the property owner was not there, and providing our base assessment, they take issue with something that we had to say, that if we were there in person with them, we could have more easily explained and perhaps got some context from their side of things as to why such a thing was in such a state, and go over from there. And then the pretty first thing, you do have to be prepared for anything. You've got oddball houses. I don't know how many geodesic adobe domes are out there, but we seem to keep finding more of them, or ones with sod roofs. A la Little House on the Prairie kind of stuff. Tell them about the banana tree, Dylan.
Yeah, they have their own personal indoor garden that they just maintain in their house, and then an outside portion as well.
Yeah, these folks have basically built an atrium in the middle of the woods in Okanagan County, filled it with tropical African plants, and built that house out of tires and mud. And so, yeah, we get some really hot, and you're like, well, the mud's not flammable. What about the tires? So there is just some really unusual things out there that we will encounter. The domes are always hard. Don't suck. Don't build things. They're actually, even if they're made out of adobe, just the way that they're built, they are more flammable than you realize. Very often these assessments also include some sort of component of forest health. If you have some forestry training, that's excellent. And usually, most folks are very impressed just by the use of a standard a bit of DVH tape and a rangefinder. We also very often will be tracing on August that we also end up covering human and wildlife conflict in one form or another. A lot of diverse wildlife in Oklahoma County and parts and really across the state. And so oddly enough, the metaphor of keeping rattlesnakes out is also a very good one for keeping embers out. Or skunks. Thankfully, we have not encountered any skunks yet during our assessments, but we have encountered rattlesnakes from time to time. This particular rattlesnake, this lovely couple, they had already had a home in Louisiana for a couple of years, never seen a rattlesnake. They bought a new one down the street. They lived there for about 6 days. Like I said, never seen a rattlesnake before. We go out to their backyard and there's 2 of them, including this one right here. So we did help these folks meet the neighbors and gave the whole skew of, you don't want to try to pick them up, that kind of thing. But also the just general wildlife conflict, which is conflict with black bears, small mustelids and things like that. But also it's a great example of, we'll get asked a lot of oddball questions. People have no idea who we work for. We had a gentleman last week who thought we worked for the Bureau of Land Management. Many people think that the Forest Service, the Caldwell Tribe, Oklahoma County. So one of the most common questions that we will always get is, what is a conservation district? So that several of our homework assessments have led to further interaction with other planners. So very interesting activity. You will encounter damn near any. Yeah, definitely the banana mud tire people kind of took the cake. But also they're 45-minute long driveways. So great. But ultimately, what we are trying to avoid with this is to see these kinds of outcomes for homes during a wildfire. So this home burned, we did not assess this home before it was exposed to fire, but this home burned during the August 2024 Eagle Bluff fire near the Canadian border. This is one of the few inhabited buildings that was lost, and we actually 4 structures were lost altogether. It was a recreational cabin. The gentleman who owned it was a writer of some sort. Unfortunately, he lost all of his writing because he did it by on paper. All of it was destroyed in this fire. But you can see just some general stuff, very often not stuff that we get to see on the inside, And it goes back to the point that this gentleman had a Class A roof. He had cement shingle roof. You can see that's what most of this material is. That when that material gets exposed to a high amount of heat, it just kind of crumbles into dust. More stuff you can see on the interior of the home, you can see an exploded ammunition can, this burned up shotgun, and then also do these things that are mostly on the exterior. This is a propane tank. Small gas stove propane tanks and grills, things like that, are essentially small bombs, and they will explode when subjected to enough heat. Now, the funny thing about this house was right here. They were building another house immediately across the driveway. They've gotten framing up, they had tar paper up, starting on the roof. It was only maybe 25 feet apart. That new structure was completely untouched. So looking back at the Ember House once again, there's a lot to cover. And this is the worst thing you can do is wander up to a property owner and hand them this image. Because that is so much the context. We're at 22 below, and I see things on this that they even miss. But still, it gives us an excellent guide, things that we look for all the time. We've got ignitable material on the front porch. We've got stored wood. We've got vegetation near windows. We've got decks. We've got roof pitches. Not as much an issue, I think, on the west side, where the roof pitches are generally a bit more steeper for the sake of rain. But many homes, at least on the eastern side of the state, have lower pitches in terms of what they need. Their needles and other materials don't slop off. And so we have considerable accumulations. Go ahead.
So that's everything.
Say again.
The moss, like rifle.
Yeah, moss. So, well, so it's a bit of a different concept. So moss, it's a vegetative fuel. It can ignite, especially when it is exposed to high amount of heat. So it can be either preheated by any radiant nearby. But then, yeah, I mean, let's say that you have moss on the rooftop embers land, that moss is, let's say this is July or August. It's relatively dry, smolder, off the fire goes. That's one thing that we do have to communicate with property owners is that moisture is helpful. Moisture can reduce risk, but there is a point where moisture does not get to save. Not all vegetative fuel is created equal. Some, as we all know, some vegetative fuel is far more than others. But if it is vegetative, unless it is made out of rock, something will burn eventually. And actually, technically speaking, the rocks will. But if the rocks are on fire, something else is going on. And so you see, but that's roofing styles, vehicles. That's what you don't very often see vehicles being ignited by embers very often. Any kind of vehicle fire, I mean, it's usually some sort of electrical issue, but cars do cause wildfires all the time. But yeah, there's just a lot going on here, and I could just lecture all here for the next hour about just one of these individual flames, but that wouldn't be useful for any of us. How many folks here are familiar with 3 zones of defensible space? See, so Rosalie, tell me about some.
Oh, no. Put on the spot. Zone 1 is like the closest to the house. I think it's like up to 5 feet.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's the stuff that is like usually you really want to watch out for. Like any debris close to windows, things like that.
So you can see zone, for those of you who got initiated, zone 1 is more or less you can be viewed as the first or the last line of defense from the wildfire. This is the area where you want the maximum amount of control for vegetative fuel of any sort, and also just any human centered fuel as well. Zone 2, bit more, that's the manicured lawn, managed area. And then zone 2 is 5 to 30 feet, and then zone 3 is 30 to 100 or 30 to 200. Everyone tell me why it would be 30 to, why it might be varied, why 30 to 100 or 30 to 200.
I would call this really around the.
Not quite actually.
Also includes access to the property.
So yeah, so you would include the access road then, but let's just talk about the radius around the home. I mean, the company that we had to make this graphic, somebody's made it a square and it needed to be a circle. But why would you have a variable radius of 100 to 200 feet going?
Slopes.
Slopes, yeah, slopes. Fire moves faster up and down slopes, radiating heat or burning material rolling down. A lot of folks, they build homes where they have a nice view. Very often that nice view, no matter where you are in Washington, is on some sort of slope. It's on a bench of some sort. In Eastern Washington especially, just go and drive around the outskirts of Wenatchee or Chelan or any other town on the east slope of the Cascades. Folks build their homes as far up the slope as they can get, so they can get that view and get out of town. And so those folks have that extended home emission zone to the 200-foot line because of the potential risk of radiating heat. And also then for the down upslope of them, stuff rolling down. And so that a bit of variation. This guy, other than the square edge, we took us a long time to find someone that had an absolute clunker of a house who would let us take pictures of it. Because we wanted to find one that was in bad shape. And that's actually one thing you will find is that very often you kind of will notice that many of the people we start assessing, there's kind of a baseline of quality. There are certain people who just kind of either know or they don't want to know. So it is something you rarely ever see something that is just absolutely abysmal. But those are the folks that we really should actually be trying to reach out to and make comfortable with in order to have those kinds of interactions. It's kind of, once again, so zone 1, first and the last line, 0 to 5 feet from the exterior walls, including the edges, decks, and porches. Flammable material should be removed or heavily managed. And so we can see here, so the flow part, this home, this photo, it's actually mostly good. Has gravel there, it does have some wood maybe that's the side, but it's pretty secure in most parts. And then the creation of inflammable barriers, gravel, pavers, stones, other hand material are highly recommended. So that's one of the first barriers that we often encounter is that these days gravel, pavers, stones, that is expensive. Folks do have concerns about selling that kind of material, and also that is an aesthetic choice. That is the kind of one thing that we need to emphasize when we do home emissions assessments, is that it's a matter of choice. We're not saying that you need to go out and get gravel, we're just saying that you need to go out and create an implantable barrier of some sort, be that with gravel, pavers, with the like. A lot of homeowners are going to be making these choices after the fact, after the assessment, as much based off of their risk, as much as they on their aesthetics. And very often, somewhat not surprisingly, aesthetics will outvalue risk for many of these. And so giving them the options to be inventive, to be intuitive, but also what goes with them stylistically is pretty helpful. Perhaps one of the biggest hidden hazards of that first zone is decks and porches. Home bottoms allow pine needles, leaves, and other flammable material to accumulate out of sight. Also, as we talked about, allows wildlife to get on down under there. Embers blow under and smolder for days before igniting. And so the standard that we recommend now is 1/8 stainless steel, metal flashing, other material that can enclose areas that dramatically reduce that risk. And normally now we are recommending for any property owners for homes that have a porch that is greater 3 feet or less off the ground to fully enclose. It also just significantly reduces the temptation for folks to store stuff under porches. So we have seen that. We have seen, and also with decks and porches, most folks do that out of wood. The same is true for Trex. We have, I have seen Trex porches actually melt more than anything with that heat source underneath. Right. That's one of the many things. So houses are weird. No house looks the same. Everybody's got some odd stuff going on. They're going to have grates in the floor, like that thing out in front here. Great for keeping the floors clean and move stuff, but excellent avenue for embers to land on. Land and go on seeing. That's all. How to look at that when we head outside. Footings as well, actually. Non-supported cement footings, wood footings that go directly on the ground, are one thing that we do encourage folks to put some sort of cladding around. That is a wood fuel that could bring fire from the ground, kind of essentially act as a homemade ladder fuel, bringing fuel out of the ground and igniting the roof or any of the supporting structure. We'll see another example of why that could be a bad thing there. This is the home up in the Zama. This home was assessed twice, and thankfully, between the two assessments, which were 3 years apart, these people corrected all of these issues. I do not have pictures of the correction. So what do we see here? So in that first 5 feet, we've got a wood pile that's stored on the porch. These folks are secondary homeowners. They lived in Colorado the majority of the year. But they left this pile of wood was left out all year round. We have a coconut husk, doormat. And then we have Virginia creeper growing directly onto the structure. We've probably all seen why at least most of these are a bad idea. One, a pile of dry tinder fuel, especially right near a window. Does anyone know what's the temperature at which modern double pane glass windows crank? Say again? 240? No. Anyone want to go higher or lower? I hear 240. There is no prize at the end, but come on. Anything higher than 240? 380. Nope. Keep going. What? Keep going. 5. So I hear 500. Yeah. Raise 500. 830 degrees. Anyone want to guess how much plate glass windows cracked?
180.
180, yeah. So that goes to assessing the age of the home. The age of the home plays a big role. You're going to see a lot more plate glass windows in homes that were constructed before the 1970s. So when we see that, we're mostly seeing that in old farmhouses. older homes from the like, 60s, 70s, stuff from around the World War II era, are all of that those plate glass windows. That stuff cracks at 180 degrees rapidly, quickly, and easily lets embers into the building. So that's why any form of fuel like this is a major hazard. At least with the double pane windows, with modern glass windows, they do have a bit of an extra lifeline. You do have to produce a significant amount of radiant heat, but they're direct flame contact on that glass or on that board, so windows crack and fire would immediately spread into this house. This doormat here, we have coconut fiber. This is vegetated, but it's fuel right next to a wood frame. Now this is painted wood, it's a bit better. But all it would take is some smoldering. These folks are out of town during the summer. They don't even heard the sound of here to ski. So sometime in July, it lands on that. Smolders for several days. No one comes by. They live at the end of the road. The neighbors are also absentee landowners. That mat lights up, that door catches on fire, and they're going to the rest of the house. And then I think the vegetative fuel growing on a building is pretty much self-evident. Why that's a bad idea? That's essentially a wick. You can see a little bit, all of that brown material there, that is shed leaves and old stems off of this Virginia creeper. And we mostly see Virginia creeper, we see English ivy, other vines. Hops are a popular thing for people to do. I don't quite understand, but please grow your hops somewhere else other than literally on your house. I don't care what you do with it outside. Yeah. And it's a major issue, because, and also just think, these folks are home all the time. If that window is left open when fire hits, it goes, yes.
Maybe we can talk about this later, but I live in a really small town, not in fire country, but I'm wondering, are HIZs, in an urban area, like within the.
Yes, so we do not differentiate, so if we receive a request from home emission zone assessment, we provide it, we do not care where it is. The closest to my office that I've had to go to do an HIZ was a quarter mile down the road to go do one at the trailer park in the middle of Okinawa. And so that was the most urban part of the wildland urban interface in Okinawa County.
I mean, in my experience, I don't know if they're big hard or not preference that, inside of the public trying to believe that there's a lot more hazards around people's homes, assuming safety from,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's going to be varying levels of everything across the landscape of people have. Like I said, just and also again, it's about when we communicate, it's about the acceptable levels of risk. No one will 100% be willing to reduce their risk 100%. It's also physically impossible for them to do so. And so, this couple, let's say this couple had lived here full time. I'm not going to admonish and hold the couple from keeping their firewood pile on their deck when they need to keep their home. I would probably discuss the vegetative fuel because that's just the way for their house. But it is very context specific for when we're having these interactions. So what I'm talking about and what many folks probably hear is very broad, but context is key for everything. Perhaps moving on to the second zone, as our friends at the Department of Natural Resources like to say, it's lean, clean, and green. Fire in this zone could produce the temps high enough to produce the radiant heat of that glass crackage, things like that. In this zone, typically it's about controlling the vegetation, not eliminating. Kind of actually back to your point, for more urban areas, a lot of people actually own their property around the area around the home out to 30. In my home in Okanagan, on one side of my property, I have maybe 6 inches between my house and my property. And so this one is about as much about management as anything else for folks who are able to. That's when we talk about selections of fire resistant plants for landscaping and things like that. To go forward. Another thing is here, so it's hard to see, but you notice this little white pill-shaped thing. That's propane. Propane tanks are either a big concern for folks or they don't even realize what can happen. Larger propane tanks like this that are meant for home fuel, they typically don't explode. They actually normally they vent the gas when they reach to a certain temperature. Problem is that you have a venting jet of propane that's ignited, creating essentially a stationary flamethrower. From a fire perspective, that's going to freak any firefighter out. From a triage perspective, depending on how close it is to the home, firefighters are just going to avoid and on that building. Folks are not going to pay to have their propane tank moved 30 feet away from their house. I've seen one person do that. It was comically expensive, and they did that because their insurance company said if that didn't happen, they'd be dropping their cover. So what we encourage folks to do is that we essentially encourage folks to treat outdoor propane tanks as mini home ignition zones. So they themselves need that 5-foot inflammatory barrier, no matter how far it is. Also, they preferably need to be marked. Occasionally, we get people who think it's cute to paint their propane tank something. I think it's encouraged folks not to do that because anything makes a different spot, makes it going for fire hazards. So this photo here kind of emphasizes both zone 1 and 2. Anyone know roughly what kind of plant that is? Juniper. If there's one thing I want you to walk out of here today knowing, is that juniper is the worst plant in the world and they should all be killed. At least when they're near homes. These plants are incredibly flammable, they're extremely popular, and they are probably, in terms of wildfire risk from an individual plant, the most dangerous plant that people can plant for 2 separate reasons. One, does anybody ever notice how juniper shed their needles? It falls inward, yeah. So while you not have a nice green pump of bush here, you actually have essentially a small wad of dry, dead, desiccated material that is protected from additional moisture coming in contact with it, just waiting for timber to arrive. And then also juniper oils, arborvitaes, members of the cypress family have a lot of different compounds in their tissue that make them incredibly more flammable. And Western Washington, or actually a weather part of Eastern Washington context, folks do plant ornamental cedars like Western red cedar or Alaska cedar and things like that. Those trees are also in the same family as the juniper. They are just as flammable. And also for them, even mature Western red cedar or Alaska red cedar will be easily killed by even a moderately severe fire. And so they are just not meant to be near buildings. If this juniper was to catch on fire, this is a standard modern windows. That would easily produce the amount of radiant heat required to crack the window wide open. And also then you have to do a siding here. And it's hard to see, but there are vents on this house and none of them are screened. Screening vents and other openings is another central aspect of this. So, but looking at landscaping in these fire-prone landscapes, we're talking, the best way to approach landowners is again, not essentially, I have people who think that they have to clear cut their lawn. More or less. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create breaks in the future, just like in any other ecosystem in the forest, on the sagebrush. We're looking to create those natural gaps that would be maintained by fire, by wildlife, livestock, whatever, to create those open areas. And so this is where we mostly encourage people to do standard yard maintenance, which is surprisingly difficult, in fact. But getting them out of material out away from structures. Depending on where you're at, folks do have additional access to irrigation. If they have access to irrigation, we strongly encourage them to utilize it for these areas. Basic principle of plant biology is that if plants are actively moving water through their tissue, they are going to be less likely to burn. That is actually another reason that many trees that go into some sort of summer dormancy are actually a hazard there. For many of our communities that have large amounts of orchards, there is a perception by many that orchards can essentially act as field breaks. Somewhat true from a cultural sense. Those apple trees, those prunes and pears are moving water through the tissue all the time and they're well irrigated. But orchards, when subjected to enough radiant heat, will burn just like anything else. They will typically burn slowly. The fire will not penetrate into an orchard, but especially for things that are at the periphery of orchards, say the sagebrush steppe along the Columbia River, or vineyards and things like that, that is not, safety is not guaranteed with the orchards. Again, arborvitaes are terrible, junipers are terrible. Thankfully, we do not live in an area where eucalyptuses are as common. please don't let, if you happen to see someone who's actually somehow managed to get a gift, let it grow in. That's- Like I said, I don't believe in carrying around a hatchet and chopping down people's plants for them. Those are the 3 plants that if I see them and I had, I would. They are terrible and I hate them.
So if you see a situation like this, is your recommendation to have a order to remove these plants?
Yeah, this would be,
Directly tell them like, you should. remove these
yeah, this would be a situation where I would tell them. Remove these plants. And again, when it gets back down to context, so. And relative risk, we've got the juniper or an arborvitae left. If it's gonna be like, a lilac bush or a helleborus or a rhododendron. Keep it irrigated, keep it trimmed, you're probably good to go. If it's something that they have an emotional attachment to, my father planted that bush. Or we planted that tree when my son was born, that kind of thing. You're not gonna chop that down. Yeah, you're not gonna be the monster that day. So having the context is great. But yeah, but these are where I draw the line. These are an absolute hazard and should be removed. They also should not, ideally, they should not be within 30 feet of the building at all. Popular species to be used for shelter belts, windbreaks, and air efficient. So you can see here, both of these, yeah, a bit of zone 2 and 1 in this photo. But you can see a lot of different fuel sources. In this photo here, what's the biggest risk that y'all see? Say again? I'm deaf as a post, folks, we gotta speak up.
I can go up against the wall and I'm.
Yeah, and so essentially here. We have a continuancy of fuel, just like with, fire. There's nothing stops this fuel. Yeah, this is a grade A, class 1 metal roof. But radiant heat damage alone will be able to ignite this house. Here, we've got nicely limbed up trees. So these folks took the care to limb these trees up. But we've got an arborvitae that acts as a ladder here. We've got plenty of pine needles. And we've got just stores of other material just hidden throughout the whole area. And wheat cloth mostly melts, but it's an issue. So as we move to zone 3, which is again about that 3 to 100 foot or 30 to 100 foot or 30 to 200 foot, depending on the slope. This is where I like to say that where the wild meets the woods, or the lawn meets the wild. This is where the folks, if they have that ability to encourage them to manage the naturalistic landscape around them, but still manage. It goes back to anything else with wildfires, that the public perception of what forest should look like is very divergent from what forest and woodland should look like across these ecosystems. So getting them to recognize, they can still have that aesthetic, they can still have the privacy of trees, they can still have the privacy of the aesthetics of that vegetation, wildlife habitat value, many other ecosystem services that we derive from whatever habitat and vegetation community you have to be in, whether that be forest, woodland, sagebrush, wetland, whatever. But this is the area where they need to manage. Again, it goes back, breaking up clumps, removing ladder fuels. If they can move stuff like propane tanks and wood piles out into that 3rd zone. Again, that's an issue of access. Beautiful. And also these folks are, this is not the best because I think many folks have a root cellar dug into a hill on their property, but people can aspire to that. But this is the zone that has the most. Let me put it to you. Of these 3 zones, which has the most value in terms of the effort put in? I'm seeing 1, I'm seeing 3, I'm seeing 1. And so, from my perspective, I can see an argument for 3. But I think it is 1. You can reduce vegetation in zone 3, you can create those clumps and gaps in zone 2. But if the actions aren't taken, the wood pile aren't removed, and those vegetative fuels that are built up underneath the window aren't removed, an ember that's out of here can still move into there. And so very often we'll see, and I'm sure that the folks who've done HIZs have experienced this before, is that often property owners and people who have us come out are kind of approaching this, viewing it from the wrong direction. When people think about wildfire, they see wildfire as something out there. So they're looking at it. The perception of risk is based on what's beyond them. So they see their neighbor's house. They see the hunk of Forest Service land up on the hill. They see the sagebrush across the road by the mailboxes. And that's all great, because ideally, hopefully, unfortunately, if the fire comes, that fire will come. Well, but again, this is all talking about values. What do these folks value? They value their home. So really, they should be turning and looking from the outside in. So that's a big part of what we try to do in Okanagan, having folks with that communication. That the idea is that we kind of redirect people's attention. So that's why Zone 1 takes that priority, because they're looking at what is the most valuable thing there. And just kind of top off before we head outside. I mean, for folks who are with us this morning for the forest and fire discussion, kind of mixed views of Firewise USA sites, but Firewise communities and any kind of community level organization for wildfire has some sort of value. Creating that system and interdependency and cooperation with folks who use to ensure not only their own safety, but those of their fellow community members. And then also just for the sake of that, two pictures. In progress homes are great because you can catch people before they're making mistakes or while they're in progress. And then this is just nice. So this home is in the southern part of the Metcalfe Valley. We've got aluminum siding down the bottom. We've got, these people have more gravel than anything else on the land. It's situated right where the sagebrush step in the Metcalfe meets the beginning of Potter's Pine Woodland and Savannahs. They do have the biggest risk of these folks that they have a large shed business. But before that, we're going to wander out, just kind of leisurely look around the building. If there just kind of any questions or comments, going fast and probably not making much sense, but it's my sense of works. But anyhow, just kind of anything before we wander out and have a look. Go ahead, Rosie.
In one of the other sessions, somebody mentioned that they had like done some surveys and meetings to like see how much behavioral change there was. Is that like something that you've done or you recommend? Like, have you seen that a lot of people actually take your recommendations and go forth and do things?
That's a good point. Actually, at least in Okanagan, we're busy. We don't have as much time to go back and assess the efficacy and efficiency of what we're doing with these home risk assessments. And so that's an opportunity for conservation districts, for our partners to engage with social science. University of Idaho, Washington State University, you have Northern Arizona, Cal, OSU, and others have robust and really productive natural resource sociology programs for practitioners, and having those folks come in and do surveys, doing focus groups, things like that, can be a means of kind of getting an idea of what you're doing is effective. For us, we don't know, we have done some of that in the past, but we don't know, directly speaking, if our home HIZ assessments have a direct impact on property interaction. The only time we ever find that out is when they have us come back. Like I said, that couple in Mazama, they'd had an assessment half a decade ago, and they just happened to randomly sign up again to be assessed it again last year. And they've made a lot of the changes that we've recommended in 2015. And so that's kind of the catch-22, is that the more of these we do, the harder it becomes to keep track of these folks and involve and to engage with this at a meaningful level. We try to keep the number of assessments that we do in a day to 3 at maximum. We've done more. We've done 150 in 2 days. Don't recommend doing it. But the law of diminishing returns applies to home conditions and assessments very quickly. The more that you try to do, the faster, the lower quality the assessments become, the less interaction that you have with members of the public, and the value of them erodes. Until the system that we have catches up, we're able to provide folks with financial assistance in the aftermath. Horrible market, we're damn good at doing it for forest health and fuel reduction, but until that gap in the system is solved, we're able to start giving folks money to put vents, new vents up, and put up aluminum siding, to switch out windows, and you can replace the roof if it comes to it. Slow and steady, 2 or 3 a day, ideally a cluster them. If you can do it, you get a couple of requests, do them all in the same neighborhood, have the people there, that's the way to do it. Go ahead.
Is there a timeline, for instance, if somebody puts in a request, that you say, yes, we will be there within 30, 60, or 90 days to do the assessment?
So for us, it really varies. We had a significant amount. Okanagan County is currently updating our CWPP, and so as a part of that CWPP, we put an option and a survey. Would you like to request a risk assessment? We had 700 some odd responses, and 77 of those people requested a home risk assessment, and that was in January. I don't know if many of you have been to Okanagan County, but it's not necessarily a great area to try to traverse many of the roads there in January. So we have to tell all those folks, hey, we'll get to you in the spring. But in years past, what has been a bit slower, I've had a phone call on a Monday, and I've done the assessment on a Tuesday. It really just depends on the law. The more pop and word of mouth works. If you do one assessment in one neighborhood, especially if it has an HOA or a firewise council, you will start getting more requests. Go ahead.
We're still funding from like, DNR and, like,
So it really varies. So the HIZ assessment is basically our most basic rudimentary wildfire resiliency and forestry-based service that our district provides. So we write it into almost every grant we apply for that we would do HIZ assessments. So in the 2.25 years that I worked for the Okanagan Conservation District, my time for these assessments has been paid for by Title III funds, which are federal funds given to the county in lieu of lost tax revenue from timber products for the Northwest Forest Management Act. So federal money by the county, direct money from the Conservation District, from the Conservation Commission through Forest Health and Wildfire Resiliency dollars, and also right now FEMA. And so the FEMA projects are actually done directly because I talk about filling that gap between technical assistance and financial assistance for home hardening. Right now, we have that through that FEMA grant. It is incredibly complex and not worth the time in many ways in terms of the paperwork level. Having to- Yeah. And I don't really have a good way to explain it. Yeah, we're non-regulatory and it's just kind of hard to explain.
And less people probably want us to do it, we're telling, hey, we're come back and see if you did it.
Yeah, like again, it goes back to like be kind, be direct and informed. So like I said, we're not trying to create motivation for action through enforcement. We're trying to do it through genuine dissemination of technical information and to facilitate that action. You know, the core of what it means to be a conservation district is that we are non-regulatory and that we are community driven. We are not here to compel, we are not here to. So what tools are we left then? We are left with the power of our knowledge and our ability to be kind and generous to people that we. So that's one of the best applications of HIZs. But with that, I think we're going to wander on outside. Thanks for the folks online. We'll see you around and we'll have a